Public Library. We will get started in just a sec. I want to let you know about some other events I have coming up. So we've got the Homelessness in Spokane Insights from the 2023 Point in Time count. So a representative from the city who crunches the data is going to be talking about what we learned from this year's Point in Time count. We've got Spokane Civic Salon. That's a small political discussion group I run at the end of every month. And this month we will be discussing the essay, Why Not Capitalism? A couple months ago we discussed G.A. Cohen's famous essay, Why Not Socialism? So, and this is a direct reply to that. So thought we'd be even-handed. We've got Riverside Chats, an evening with Steve McBride. Steve works for Skillskin, which helps prepare people with disabilities for careers. And he also runs the local podcast called Good Gab, where it's actually very similar to what I'm trying to do with Riverside Chats, where he just tries to highlight people who are doing cool, interesting stuff in the community. And then before I had this job, I taught philosophy at Gonzaga, so that's actually my real background. And I decided I would develop a short intro to political philosophy class to teach here in September. So that's what we're going to be doing. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that one. Okay, sorry, one more thing. I'm going to start by reading our land acknowledgement. I'm on the traditional homelands of the 4 bands of the Spokane Tribe of Indians: Upper Band, Middle Band, Lower Band, Chewelah Band. Since time immemorial, the Spokane Tribe of Indians has lived and cared for these grounds, identifying themselves as flesh of the earth. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We show gratitude to the land, river, and peoples who have been fishing, hunting, harvesting, and gathering here for generations. May we learn from one another's stories so that we may nurture the relationship of the people of the Spokane tribe and to all who share this land. So, as I said, thanks for coming out. I've been looking forward to this. I have taught Robert Nozick and other libertarian philosophers. I want to set the tone by just relaying a brief experience I had. I was listening to a podcast on educational policy, and the host had a libertarian on to discuss libertarian educational policy, and he said something that I really resonated with. He said, you know, I don't consider myself a libertarian, but I'm really glad that libertarians exist, because our civil liberties are very important, and they're the loudest ones, you know, out there defending our civil liberties. So you have in your moderator someone who is sympathetic, even if not like fully bought in. I don't know, maybe tonight I will be. We'll see. So let's start by just going down the line and just kind of saying who you are. I'll ask you in a sec, like, how you define libertarianism, but for now, just kind of state your name and how you're involved in the party.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Lloyd Morris. I'm the chair of the Spokane affiliate for the Libertarian Party of Washington. Excuse me. I'm also the marketing director for the Libertarian Party of Washington. I've been working for the state party now for about 3 years, and I live here in Spokane Valley, so not too far.
I'm Jesse Phillips, and my parents raised me as a libertarian, and I started going to the libertarian group meetups here in Spokane recently, and that's why I'm here.
Hi, I'm Randy McGlenn, and I've been a Libertarian member since 2008. Joined the state party in 2012 and became chair of the state party in 2017 for 2 terms, and I am a candidate for Spokane City Council. Didn't make it through the primary this time, but all the same, I've ran for state office, state representative, and then this local race here. Also active in the neighborhood councils, and I live right over in Kendall Yards.
Thanks, Randy. I'm Steve Hansen, Vice Chair of Spokane Libertarians, and sit on the Judicial Committee for the state. Been a libertarian since I began thinking about political thought, so it's been a while for me. And I'm glad to see you guys all here.
I'm Saffron Whistle. I'm tangentially involved as a volunteer and daughter to one of the more important people on the state council.
Okay, awesome. So I have some questions here. Some of them are sort of for everyone, and some appear to be for kind of more specific people. But let's have you all answer the question, how do you define libertarianism, and how does it differ from other political ideologies?
I would say that we're flat earthers and we don't believe in moon landings. And no, I'm just joking with all that. I'm serious. It's kind of a nuanced question. I think the easiest thing is that we're kind of a blend of both Republicans and Democrats. We're kind of in the middle. For the Libertarian Party itself, they say that for the membership, a third are former Republicans, a third are former Democrats, and the other third are just either what they call small L libertarians or just independents. So, but I like the Spike Cohen, who was our vice president nominee in 2020. I like his definition where we don't care how far left or far right you want to be, as long as you don't force it on everyone else or use the government to do the same.
Nice.
Yeah. The thing for me is I think the individual aspect is kind of important. It's liberties and abilities to do things that you choose. There's aspects to that have to be understood in terms of there are other people around you. So even though you're an individual, you do live within a world of people. So it's less about specifically just yourself. It's more about you don't ask the government to do things for you.
Great.
I see libertarianism as a philosophy that you can live the life the way you want to live it, so long as you don't interfere with anybody else being able to live their life. And so we believe in making sure that our government is there to protect those civil liberties, those rights, and to protect us against outside interference or inside interference against us individuals. Yeah.
Sure,
so
go ahead.
I think
Yeah, sure. Yeah. We have a question about what civil liberties are. I'm saying this for the recording.
Sure. Civil liberties like the right to your own life, the right to own yourself and have property, the rights to be able to speak and engage with each other and the government, the ability to trade with one another, the ability to protect yourself, the ability to believe in whatever you want to believe. Those are some of the very core principles. I mean, there's certainly others, but just off the top of my head, those are some of the fundamental civil liberties that.
Thank you. That is what we tend to mean when we say civil liberties. Life, liberty, and property, including your right to speak and your right to swing your fist up into the point of someone else's face. It's purely it's a matter of your own freedom until it restricts someone else's.
Okay, and Steve, what about you?
So orders of the day, huh? A libertarian philosophy is a philosophy based on individual rights. It's based on individuals being more important than the community, more important than the collective. Thank you. That was actually the word I was looking for. So individual rights being the paramount thing, and then non-aggression is the other thing that supports that, which says that you don't have the right to initiate violence against someone else for any reason. so between individual rights and individual representation and non-aggression, you can get to the point where you can interact with individuals and not have to have the state looking over your shoulder to define everything you do.
To build off of what my neighbor said, the idea of libertarianism does require a high-trust society, which could be a problem in some places, but
Can you explain what you mean by that term, high trust?
you can respect other people not to cause problems for you, your property, and generally you can trust other people not to impinge upon your rights without the state having to prevent it.
Cool. Awesome. My walkie-talkie's going, sorry. So I don't know if this impression is correct, but sometimes from the outside, one thing I've always found kind of interesting is like almost everybody to some degree wants to be left alone to live their own life, even if you're like a communist. And so like you're not automatically a libertarian because you want some degree of freedom. On the other hand, other than I guess like anarcho-capitalists and some of those types of positions, like a lot of libertarians still see some role for government. So is there any dividing line, or how do you guys think about that? And I guess on your impression, are there any like fundamental core principles that you all do agree on, or is it just kind of a mix and it's kind of a spectrum and that sort of thing?
It's the bare minimum of government and governmental intervention. The government's role is to keep its people safe, to prevent both internal and, well, to punish internal and prevent external damage to their lives, liberty, and property. So fewer wars would be very important. Along with, that's the reason police forces are important. Of course, I would love if they were less necessary, but you do what you can.
Randy, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I just so you were just mentioning like everyone at some point likes to be left alone, and so that's just an example of really how libertarian philosophy overlays a broad spectrum of ideology and beliefs. So, we hear a lot about left and right politics, right? And in fact, libertarianism doesn't even plot on a left-right scale. We use what's called a is it four dimensional? It is a compass. Yes, so it's a two-dimensional chart, and so there's not only left and right, but there's also libertarianism and then authoritarianism are the end scales on that. So libertarianism being the most minimum force of government over our daily lives, and authoritarianism being something like a despot or a dictator style form of government. So libertarianism can encompass a very broad area of all four of those quadrants based on individual beliefs. And so it's really kind of a range. And so just to help people understand that, I kind of say, well, we're kind of smack dab in the middle if you think about left and right. But really, we have very left-leaning views on things. We believe in equality of marriage. We believe in the criminal prosecution of drug use, although I do agree it should be a medical issue if there's a problem. But I also believe that the government should not be taking the incredible amounts of money out of our pockets to pay for what I see as a very bloated system and squandering our hard-earned money on things that we don't see any direct benefit to us. So there's areas where we overlap in different philosophies, and so that's the best I can try to describe on how that overlays.
Cool. Anybody else want to say something about that particular question?
Yeah, so I think that your statement about there being a huge difference between libertarians and where they land on a scale of statist to anarchist, it's super valid, and there's not really any dividing line between individuals within the party. It's definitely a sliding scale from individual to individual, and we all have good arguments for our position.
And kind of to add to the how much government goes in there, I think with the libertarian philosophy, you're more interested in what is it that we can do rather than being like, oh, I want society to look like this, so I'm going to have the government force this upon everyone. It's more of a, how do I make society be the way I want it through my actions and interactions with others, rather than, oh, let's just take a majority, whether it be 51% or 80%, and then impose that upon everyone.
Okay, right on.
Precisely. There are the dividing line for how much government there should be, as you said, is nearly non-existent, but even more so is the cultural point of view. We have very few uniting lines on that. But it is more of a people should be allowed to partake in whatever they desire in that area. More of a they should be allowed to, not they should. It's all about permitting people to do as they wish.
So I think one concern that jumps out to a lot of people when they hear about libertarianism, we want smaller government. Well, the government provides a lot of goods for people, right? They provide roads. They provided this library. They provide police, like a lot of really important services. And some people just sort of wonder, okay, well, if the government's not providing that, are those things not going to exist? Or how are they going to come about to exist? So, yeah, I think in particular, I mean, we can consider a number of these, but roads, schools, healthcare, I mean, but any of those you want to take a crack at. This says, well, anyone can answer.
I'll take that one if that's cool.
Yeah.
So again, like everyone has already said, libertarian is kind of a spectrum, right? I would say that for those of us in the party, we're not like, oh, let's just have Mad Max overnight, no government anymore, or whatever, right? It's not like that. Like, we understand that there are certain functions that the government is essential for. Like, we look at the government not as, as an entity to force things on other people. We look at it, the government should exist to protect our rights, right? That was the whole reason that, the U.S. government was formed, was to protect our rights through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, not to take these living documents and twist it in a way to suddenly create a bureaucracy of laws, and suddenly the freest country in the world now has more of its population in prison than any other country, right? Like, it's kind of a hypocritical thing. We would like to reduce government to basically, I would like to say, like, the minimalist point possible. And I think, like, we look outside, right? We see there's so much construction in Spokane. It's been going on for so long. I mean, I like to always bring up the North-South Freeway. That thing's been going on for like 3 decades now. Now, we've asked the government, through our legislature, our state reps, Olympia, come on, what's going on here, right? And a lot of times, and I think if you live east of the Cascades, you'll kind of understand the sentiment that Olympia doesn't care about east of the Cascades, right? This is why we can't get a freeway built in 30 years. So the argument's like, well, why are we continuing to pour money into this project without any signs of completion at all, right? Like the aspect of roads, for example. At the start of this of the century, when we started having automobiles, and we needed to have some type of infrastructure laid out for those, right? Because horse and buggy is, an automobile is a lot harder on a road than a horse is, right? So what did we have? We had tolls. We had tolls that were used to pay for this road or this bridge or whatever. And the agreement was generally that once the bridge is paid for, the toll would go away. But what has happened is that we've seen these tolls basically end up in perpetuity, right? And I just use that as an example because we can take that segment and apply it to a construction project, a highway project, a healthcare system, whatever. We understand that the government says they're going to provide these things, but the layers of bureaucracy involved make it so inefficient that it's like, why am I even taking my money and putting it into the government's hands to put it into another middleman's hands, before it finally gets to its destination, when we as a collective say, hey, you know what? We need a road. We need a road for our community, our neighborhood. Let's get together and pool our funds and do it. Or in a case, say, if it's like a busy shopping center, right? A new Walmart goes up, or a Costco or whatever. Who is going to pay for this huge intersection? Let Costco and Walmart pay for it. They're the ones who are going to bring in the customer base. Why does the government have to provide an avenue to make those big corporations money? Why can't they already do that? I mean, I grew up in Virginia, and I mentioned Costco because that was like my first job out of high school, and I worked for them for a long time. And the road that it was built on, and if you know anything about Costco history, there was Price Club before the merger thing, right? Literally, and it was Price Club Boulevard for 30 freaking years, right? Like that road was built for that Price Club. So why not have the Price Club pay to build the road, right?
Okay, does somebody else want to maybe talk about another issue like police or...
So first of all, Lloyd keeps trending closer and closer towards the anarchist end of this spectrum.
No, shut up.
and but coming from that end of the spectrum, I would say that, there really isn't a need for the state to exist to pay for these things. It's been throughout history, the state hasn't necessarily needed to pay for these things. If somebody needed a road built, they'd built the road. They'd put a toll on it, but they built the road and they'd maintain the road. Canals happened in the northeast of this country a long time before the state started spending money on things. The Great Northern Railroad, all the way right here to Spokane, was built with private money. The other two railroads were mismanaged and built terribly, while the Great Northern came through on time and under budget. These things can be done with private money, and I think that the allure for people in general is that when the state does it, the state can just throw all kinds of money at it. They have no limits. They can reach into our pockets and get whatever they need, and then you see these results like immediately. But they're not always good results. The market will make a better determination as to what should actually go there, where it should go, and how big or small it should be. And so the things that we see the state doing and making mistakes on are way more difficult to backtrack on, whereas a private party will get punished by the market and have to reset. Yes, sir?
So it's free enterprise, the tenet of the Libertarian Party? Yes. Because the word free is in there, maybe.
Yes, sir. So like 90%, 99% of this party would. So back to that question on what are some of the core things that we absolutely all agree on. Free markets, we would determine, call it free markets. So free markets, non-aggression,
Free speech,
100%. The idea of self-ownership is 100% a thing that we believe in. So having the state tell you what you can and can't do with your body is a real sticking point. So the on the free market one, yes, we are.
So I'll dive in a little bit about some of the services, but just to kind of recap something. So the way I approach this is our government is very much like a corporation. As a matter of fact, when a city is formed, they incorporate. So it's a very special type of corporation. And each of the people that reside in our nation, our state, our cities, we are shareholders in this special corporation. And the idea is that we developed through our Constitution a contract saying, okay, the people we elect, we're hiring you to do certain things for us. to keep us safe, to put fires out, to help us be healthy, to build roads where we need them, to provide other infrastructure, sewage, water, the common utilities, and to provide education. As a matter of fact, in the Constitution of the United States, it says to promote the general welfare of the people. And so that is the core fundamental functions of our government. And so libertarians want to see our government work efficiently, do its essential functions that it's there to do, and do them well, and do them as minimally cost effectively as possible. So I think I said that wrong. At the lowest cost possible, but effectively. And so the problems that we see in our government today is we're providing services, some of which we question whether or not it's providing a real value to the people. And
What's an example or a few examples?
A few examples would be there is a federal. What's that? U.S. imperialism. Yeah. So, for example, there are a number of bureaus at the federal level. One of them I remember reading up on is a public works department. It was from the era of FDR, and it was for building dams and providing highway infrastructure and things. And its core purpose was to build the Hoover Dam and to ensure that it was effective and basically manage that project. And it grew, it bloated into, now they do inspections and they write all sorts of policies, and they don't really, in fact, do anything direct in terms of the construction of new infrastructure. They simply manage the projects that they were initially designed to do. You could say another one would be the FCC. A lot of people don't even understand what it does, and yet it determines things on how we can access the internet, whether or not we can utilize the radio waves. And so there are, in today's technology, there's very little value that they're really providing for us. If our internet is working properly, we have the access to do whatever we want on it. And really, the government should not interfere on that. And as a matter of fact, during the early years of the internet, when the government really didn't even understand what it was, let alone how they could regulate it, some of the best innovations in our country happened with the internet. And so ever since the government has had more and more grip on that, we have seen a lot more difficulty in being able to emerge in the industry through technology and through the internet. So that, to us, is a huge impedance on that. But getting back to my original point is, let's make sure our government is working efficiently. We don't need, for example, IBM, global company. It became so huge and was so inundated with its own internal workings that it had to file for bankruptcy. It collapsed. And it's a very small portion of what it used to be. Our government is the same way. Roughly 2/3 of the population work for a form of government, either federal, state, or municipal. And so think of the expenses. Now, federal government is a multi-trillion-dollar budget.
Does that include contractors with the government, with like the federal government?
Partially, yes, yes. But just the sheer amount of money just to run the federal government is unfathomable, and we aren't even talking about your state government and your city government and the county, et cetera. And so you look at the amount of money and resources it takes just to run the government. Very little of your tax dollars actually go to affect the outcomes that they were intended to do. So much of it is eaten up in administration and the policies and processes. And if you ever look at an example of a municipal code or a state code, you'll go cross-eyed trying to read it and interpret that. And there's literally staff and lawyers and professionals who specialize just in reading the law that are employed in the government. And that's all they do. So are they really providing value to us? Or maybe should we be writing our laws a little more simpler?
Saffron, you look like you were trying to get in earlier. Do you have something you wanted to say?
Public schooling is a topic near and dear to my heart, or, well, something I hate. But it is being grossly mismanaged, and, well, charter schools help, but private schools also help, but they are far better in other countries where they do not have public schooling because there's no alternative. They have to be at an affordable cost because, well, the demand is at a certain level where they can't make any money if it's too expensive. And while I can't say it's a perfect solution or ultimately the best one, it's the only one as I see it. And, well, of course, we can't phase out public schooling. Well, we can't cut out public schooling. We'd have to phase it out, but...
Yeah, good. One thing I've always been kind of interested in when I sort of take a peek over at what the Libertarians seem to be up to is, now, in any party or any kind of like political ideological group, there will necessarily be a diversity of thought. Like that has to be the case. But sort of publicly, there's kind of like a public position and you kind of have to fall in line. But libertarians seem a lot less like that. Like it appears to me sometimes, there are different factions. The diversity of thought is encouraged, and it's like, hey, I think about it this way, you think about it that way, that's fine. We're both still libertarians. So I guess to one degree, talk about some of those different factions. And there was like a recent like dust up with the Mises Caucus. You could talk about that. And then also just kind of some of the things that libertarians tend to fight about within their own ranks.
I'll take this one for a moment. Yeah, it's kind of a big umbrella, I got into politics because I'm a gun guy. Guns were a part of me growing up, as a teenager. As a young man, I was in the military. Half the reason I joined because I like guns, and that's my thing. And that's actually how I got into politics, because when you're into guns, you realize, oh, wow, there's like 10,000 different laws regarding firearms. And it's sort of like, oh, I have to do my own homework so I don't accidentally become a felon, right? That's how I got into politics. Whereas, we have individuals like one of my good friends. She's very left, right? In purple hair or whatever, free hippie and stuff. So it does encompass a lot of different people. I would say that what brings us all together is that our love of liberty, right? We want to get back to that core, what we talked about before, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Every American, and I would even say that libertarian philosophy extends beyond the borders. We kind of look at it like it's not just for us, it's for the whole world, right? We believe we're not free unless we're all free. So with that said, like, even though there are libertarians who aren't into, say, firearms like I am, they understand that, well, I love freedom. And freedom is sometimes a double-edged sword, right? And I think that's what most of us understand, that we don't want to use the state as a way to legislate morality or to force people into a line of thinking. We don't believe in one-size-fits-all solutions. One of our beliefs is that the biggest minority is the individual, because all of us are different. So these one-size-fits-all solutions don't work. But again, it's that love of freedom and understanding liberty, and also just realizing that, like, hey, freedom's a double-edged sword. your hobbies or, you know, your career choice or your lifestyle, I might not 100% agree with, but I'm willing to defend that right because I understand that that's how we live in a free country. Because if I don't believe in freedom for somebody that I don't like or I disagree with, then I don't really believe in freedom. And I think that's what really kind of comes down to is that, you know, whether you're involved in this politically because you're into guns or, you know, you want a better healthcare system or, you know, you want better school, whatever the reason is, you know, all libertarians are just like, how can we do this without, while making it as free as possible for everybody and not trying, again, you know, just pick this one-size-fits-all solution, just take it or leave it. We understand all of us are different.
I want to hear other people how they answer that question, but quick side note, did any of you catch Killer Mike's speech to FIRE, the Foundational for, FIRE, what does it stand for? Foundation, huh? FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Killer Mike, the rapper from Run the Jewels, gave like a 10-minute speech, and it was amazing.
I know he had been in some issues with the law. I don't know, you know, the exact details, but I think it kind of brings up that point in the U.S. Like, you can be free and happy as you want, but a big problem is that once you have broken some type of law, whether, you know, and before you even try in a court of law, the state will throw everything at you to either get a conviction or to like basically ruin you financially, right? And that's not justice. So I think that's what's happened. Like in the case of is it Killer Mike, Big Mike, whatever. Like he found himself on the wrong side of the law and basically had all the power of the state thrown at him and was like, this is not just. This is unjust. This isn't justice, right? And I think that's what happens for a lot of individuals is that, you know, you just kind of, you live your life and everything's cool, but something happens and you find yourself, you know, facing down the government, whether at the state, local, federal level, and you're almost powerless and suddenly you don't feel so free anymore. And, you know, I think also too, we realize as well, like in this country, unfortunately, it's become a pay-to-play system. And we understand that as well. Like, a lot of people think that libertarians like, oh, if you had it your way, only rich people would prosper and all the rest of us would suffer. It's like, no, we want everyone to prosper. We want to get the government out of the way and get all these crazy laws out of the way. Because one of the things, like, if no victim, no crime, right? If you engage in a hobby that doesn't hurt me, right? Let's say you're a drug addict and you're addicted to cocaine, but you still are a productive member of society. You still go to work. You still do what you need to do. You still pay your taxes, whatever. It's like, you have an addiction, that's fine, but I don't think they should make you a felon and throw you into a cell for it. You know what I mean? If you could still be a productive person, we understand that. No, again, it's the whole no victim, no crime aspect, and that I might not agree with your hobbies, but I also understand that you can partake in them, and if you're not hurting me physically or financially, that's the cost of living in a free society.
Yeah, so thank you. Other comments about the different factions and the disagreements within the party.
Yeah, so on the LP is basically divided into two groups. There's a group that's very incrementalist and wants to work within the system as much as possible to to move forward, to move the party forward, to make the party more prominent within the two-party system that we exist in. And those people that would, you know, recruit a Republican to run Bill Weld as a candidate, and then I think the party just ends up looking bad when that happens, but a lot of people think that that's the proper path forward for that. The big dust-up in Reno was about that, really. It was about the other faction in the party that says, no, we just need to go out and preach the gospel of freedom. We need to tell people that there is a third way, that the two-party system isn't the only path forward, and you need to start thinking outside of that two-party box. And that was really what the dust-up was about. And to be honest, we have very little hope of winning offices on that side, the Mises Caucus side of the equation there. And then it's even more messy than you think it is, because within the Mises Caucus, it's a giant dust storm in there too. So, but that is the general difference between the factions.
I think this is sort of tangent to that, but it's similar. So I think one of the challenges we have with having such a broad spectrum of views in those areas is one of the pieces that gets thrown at us is, oh, the Republicans lost because the Libertarians were in the race, or the Democrats lost because the Republicans were in the Libertarians were in the race. And so what ends up happening is people are like, oh, we would like to vote for the Libertarian, but they don't fully meet our views, or we lean more towards this. So we're going to still try to do this one because that's the one that's going to win. And so we have that breadth. And even within the Libertarians, when it's like, oh, who am I going to vote for? You actually have to learn, okay, this person has some specific particulars. And so this one I like, this one I don't like. And you can't just be party line and be like, oh, Libertarian, I'm going to do that because...
Real quick, just to touch on Jesse's point, it's like, so we don't engage in like the tribalism that like the Republicans and Democrats do, but it also makes it hard because not all of us are willing to toe the line, even for our own candidates, right? And again, because we have that broad umbrella, it's often difficult for us to sometimes come together on some very specific issues, like who should be our presidential candidate, or there's still fights about presidential candidates that ran decades ago, right? It's just, and that's what I think that's one of the jokes is like, well, we don't need to fight the two parties because we do enough fighting ourselves within. but that's the thing. It's kind of a beauty of the party too, right? Is that we're not a bunch of robots that are just going to toe the line. Like, we understand that politics is very nuanced, and we're willing to explore those nuances. And, we're not always going to get everyone to agree. I mean, clearly, there's nothing on this planet that almost everyone 100% will agree on. But again, we kind of look at it under that umbrella of liberty. How can we accomplish this goal and not infringe on your rights and try to make it cost efficient, not basically be a mismanagement of government, funds and, just layers of bureaucracy in the process.
Okay, cool. So let's look at a few other issues. I've kind of sort of asking abstract questions. What does the Libertarian have to say about how government should regulate business? That's how business is regulated, a huge issue.
They shouldn't. I really want to, yeah.
Externalities?
Because that's the exact same thing that I would have gone with. Yeah, no, there would be externalities that you would have with zero regulation, but you also would gain a lot more competition. So one of the things and this is coming at it from an Austrian economics point of view, is to say that the competition is the thing that you're after, and the competition brings the best to the top. And right now what we have are industries with regulatory capture within the United States, where those industries don't have to compete with anybody else because of licensure, because of overly regulated situations where, for an example, there's a new pharmaceutical coming online here in the greater Spokane area. It's called Selkirk Pharmacies, or Pharmaceuticals. And all they're trying to build, as far as I'm aware, I know the initial beginning was sterile water. That's all they want to build. It's been 5 years now. They still haven't made a product. All of the money that's gone into that building, gone into the equipment, in 5 years, they haven't even made a product. How can a pharmaceutical start up and compete in an environment where it takes that much to get inside the regulatory capture to create a product? It's not even possible. And so to eliminate the regulations that we have and the licensure, you're going to have some wild cards out there that do harm to society. But you know what we have right now? Wild cards out there who have regulatory capture that do harm to society. So it's not like we're trading good for bad or bad for good. there's going to be bad in both systems. What you're not going to see is a company that can hide behind the state when they do something wrong. You're not going to see banks that go and do terrible financing and end up in a bankrupt situation and then see the Fed come in and create a bunch of money, bail them all out, and then every individual in the city, state, nation pays the price of a deflated value of your currency, which is what we call inflation. So, yeah, deregulation is really the only way to go.
I feel like one of the important pieces to call out is those tenets that we keep not specifying at the beginning. Because force and fraud is one of the things we like to state is we don't accept that someone's going to defraud you. So if a company is doing stuff, we would want some sort of repercussions. Part of the challenge for that is people look at that as, oh, well, now something bad has already happened. How do we regulate it so that bad things never happen? And I don't think that libertarians view the way that we want to operate as locking everything down to the point that nothing bad happens, because ultimately that leads to bad things happening.
So talking about, again, businesses, right? And I want to bring up in the recent few years, there was, I think it was Colorado, where it was the bakery, right? And the gay couple that came in and was refused service or refused to have a cake made, right? And then, of course, went to court and it was ruled that, yes, this business has to, right? And going back to what we believe is like free market principles, right? We don't think the government should be able to tell you, what you can and do, how you can run your business, and who you have to be forced to serve to. We look at it rather, we would like the free market to take care of itself. And I'll give the example, right? So let's say a store opens up, right? And they say no Asian people allowed. And I'll say that because I'm Asian, right? They say no Asian people allowed, right? What do you think would happen, right? Especially in this day and age, you'd be like, that is completely racist, all over the news, all over Facebook, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that business would get a lot of customers with that type of reputation? Probably not, right? That's how we look at the free market. Like, hey, if you want to run a business as I'm not going to serve gay people, I'm not going to serve Asian people, black people, whatever, that's fine. We would prefer the free market itself just to kind of, filter you out anyways. We don't want the government saying that you have to do it this way. We want society as ourselves saying, we know this is right, or we know that this is wrong and what this business is doing wrong, so we're not going to spend money there.
And we want to live in a society that would do that.
Yeah, understood. Saffron, what are your thoughts on the libertarian approach to military intervention?
Well, as dictated by the non-aggression principle, we should not be acting first. And even then, I don't think we ought to be wasting taxpayer dollars protecting all these European countries just because they don't want to do it themselves. It's one of the few things that allows them to maintain socialized health care, but that's not the point. We ought not to be getting involved in the Middle East, obviously, and we ought to be halting these wars as soon as possible. The botched withdrawal from Afghanistan is its own problem that I do not wish to discuss, but we should only be retaliating. We should not be beginning this. American imperialism is so counter to our beliefs and ideology.
Yeah, okay, cool. This one looks like it was designed, or I guess assigned, for Randy, Saffron, Steve, or really anyone. How do libertarians view the balance between individual rights and community responsibilities?
I guess I'll start then. So the key thing there, individual rights and responsibilities. So we as a society have a responsibility to each other in terms of a mutual respect. That's why we have laws. to care for one another. That's why we have doctors, and we can do things collectively as individuals and have our individual freedoms. The key thing is that understanding at what level do we need to collectively orchestrate these things. So, and that's really, I think, a large area of debate within the Libertarian Party itself, is at what level do we need to come together collectively to address issues that engage us all, like, for example, COVID. And so I think that the important thing to understand is that we should have a framework on how we will execute things and how we will organize things, but not necessarily have a government entity doing those things. So we can have private industry work within that framework to carry out issues that are important to us in our society. And nothing should be compulsory. And I know that that's a big area of contention, especially around something like COVID. But you also have to understand the reason, I believe, why we had such a big issue with noncompliance of getting vaccinated is the distrust of our government. Because we start off with, you'll do this, and then we have to backpedal and explain why, or worse yet, we make mistakes and realize, oh no, we don't want to do that anymore. And so it creates confusion, it creates that distrust, plus the things that the government has done in the past, such as the sickle cell issue, the experiments that were done. So the key thing is the government should be advising us. They should be empowering organizations to act on our behalf to help address issues, but not necessarily anything that is compulsory that we are forced to do. So we have a choice.
It won't show up on the recording. Well, I want it on the recording.
Okay, so I think to answer your question, Shane, it is my opinion that the freer a people is, the more generous and the more civil they are. And this is based on a lot of soul searching on my part because I have watched it. So at one point, Americans are the freest people on this planet, right? Not long ago. So when I first came to this country, I discovered something astounding, that these people were so good, so caring, so compassionate. Then I compare that to the country that I came from, which is China, probably one of the most repressive society today. And what do you see? The people there are the most callous people right now. So a true story that happened to me personally, just about 10 years ago, I hosted a fundraiser for a friend on top of some other fundraiser, and people around me opened their purse to this stranger that I was fundraising for so generously. Incredible. And I was relating this story to a friend in France, and she said this, and I quote, "You Americans are so good to each other, are so compassionate." And I said, why? Wouldn't you, the French, do this? Because this person is indeed in need. She says, no, the French would never do this. So I thought and I thought and I thought, and I came to this conclusion. The reason the Americans were so good to each other, so civil, and you would stop on the roadside when somebody was in need to help a total stranger, was because that we were free. Because we knew that when we open our purse, we had the freedom to go out and make that $100 to give it to someone else when we have to, right? Whereas in these repressed societies, when you have more government involved, when you have more rules and more regulations, you know this $100 that you're going to give is going to be hard to come by, and therefore I'm holding on to it. So the more regulated, the more laws, the bigger the government is, the less compassionate, less civil a people will be. And you are seeing it.
You sure
are
you
seeing
shouldn't
it.
be on the panel?
So
Jinjin, that's really insightful. Thank you.
To add to that, I think actually the state tries to drive wedges between different factions of the population, just because if we work together, if we understand that we're free to be free and free to associate with whom we want and free to trade with whom we want, if we understand that, then we just work together and we realize how horrible the state is being to us, how much we're being punished by the state just for existing. And now I forgot, where did we start this question at? So the individual rights, yeah, and so with great freedom comes great responsibility, and anybody who would define freedom as being able to do whatever they want with no consequences is just a fool. And so with that freedom, a libertarian, I think, pretty much across the board is going to say that you should be free to do whatever you like to do. But as soon as that impacts somebody else, you need to stand up and take responsibility for it, whether that means a restitution or you get some jail time or whatever. However, that part will go scatter all over the board with. But right, you need to take responsibility. I think we're all there across the board there.
One of the things I kind of think of in a different level is what does it mean for the community? What's community? I live in one city and I'm a few blocks from two other cities. And so I get to vote in one of the cities, but I don't vote in the ones next door to me. And so which community am I part of? And so I don't think people necessarily see cities as the community. They see the people that are around them, where they're living, as their community, people that they interact with. And when you have the government, that's actually the easy way out, because you're like, hey, if I have the government taking care of people, I get to complain to them and tell them, hey, these are the things that we need to do. This is what needs to happen. Go take care of that. Libertarians are individualist, but I feel like that brings more of a need to be like, okay, well, actually, how do I solve the community problem around me? Because you're not allowed to go to the government and say, this homeless person on the side of the street, yeah, the government needs to do something about that. I don't want to deal with it, right? Like, it's now in your face and you have to do something, rather than just being like, this isn't my problem. I have a community to take care of it, or government, because that's what I see as that.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to what you said, because I love real world examples and life experiences. But your statement that the more free you are, the people are more. You tend to be more generous and helpful. It kind of affects your lifestyle, and I think we see that every day in the U.S. when you compare a big city to any rural area, right? I mean, if I get a flat tire on I-90 on the bridge, then ain't no one going to stop me. I don't even know if a cop would even show up if I called him, right? Whereas if I was, say, like on Highway 2 going on Reardon or Davenport, there's no doubt in my mind that somebody's going to stop. And my wife is from Davenport, and I always bring up this example. Like, there's a gun store next to the high school in Davenport. And if you tell someone in the city that, their head's going to explode, right? Like, that's crazy. Why would you have... But they have that, in such a small town, really have that freedom, and no one cares.
More social trust.
Exactly, right?
Anybody under 30 would probably their head would explode if I told them that I used to take my shotgun to school in high school in the gun rack in the back of my pickup. So,
let's see if the audience has any questions. Are there any questions that have come up for the audience during the talk? Yeah. Now,
So this is not a very good quote, but I think Thomas Jefferson said something like, democracy works well if people are moral. I don't think that's the exact quote, but so I wonder how libertarians deal with that, because I don't think anybody thinks that forced morality works, but how do you deal with people that aren't moral? And then the other question akin to that is, how do you deal with selfishness when people are free? What's the libertarian philosophy or solution to that?
Okay. Thank you. I consider the solution to a lack of morality. Of course, there's no good one, but I personally see it as the church. I am not someone who likes organized religion. I do not like organization with any strict rules. But I do consider the church to be a massive boon to things such as morality in the place of the state, which merely punishes you for breaking the law. The church can't really punish you unless you get excommunicated or something. It's admittedly based on belief. So
The church is community, isn't it?
yes, the church is your community.
Community, which is school.
Precisely.
Church is a community.
back to one of the panelists.
Yeah, I think one of the questions would be kind of like, well, why does he say that the democracy doesn't really work without that morality of everyone? And it probably relates to how you don't have a definitive, this is going to be everyone's 100% agreement, whether it be because there's 500 religions in this location and 200 over here, or these other pieces. And I think from a libertarian perspective on that part is the government doesn't have the power to do it. So there's no one seeking in a democracy of libertarian views power to regulate morality. It's like, well, the government is sitting here just waiting to hear a trial for some issue that might have come up or something. It's not a place that you go and say, okay, here's this moral thing, so I need to make sure this is done or that is done and things like that. And I don't quite remember your second question on there.
Does anybody else want to address the point?
Sure, I will. So one of the things that came up was community. So we talk about our court system is so the reason why we have jurors is because the effectiveness of holding people accountable is through your peers. And there's often a quote, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but there's nothing worse than the ire of your peers in terms of holding you accountable. And so I think that we have to come together, and this is one of our biggest challenges, I believe, in this country today, culturally, is we do not have the stomach to hold one another accountable. We can be upset about something. We might speak out about a politician behaving badly or cheating the system or something bad happening. But when it comes to imparting some sort of ramifications for those actions, people don't want to do that. People don't want to engage in that. And that's the biggest challenge that we have, is we're not willing to impart consequences for bad actors. And you have to have that. Otherwise, people will continue to do bad as long as they know that they're going to get away with it. And so, right. So within any organization, as a matter of fact, within the state party, for example, I'll give you an example. Our treasurer at one point, when I first was involved as chair, embezzled $800 from our bank account to buy themselves a plane ticket to our national convention. So when I first discovered this, I immediately approached him about it. And of course, he denied it. But we had evidence building as to confirming this that this did happen. And so I took it to the board, and I immediately requested that we sanction our treasurer and that we repeal all access to all financial instruments and do a proper investigation. I had an uphill battle convincing the board that that's something we needed to do, because there was doubt and people liked this person, and they didn't want to be the bad guy or gal to come down on this person and say, we're going to dismiss you, or whatever the sanctions would be. After we built up the evidence and really started to show the impact that this was having, and just the sheer actions of that person through this investigation, we started to slowly convince people. But it took a lot of effort on my part to continue to be on point about, we need to hold this person accountable. We need, to make sure that we stand up saying that this is not appropriate and it's not going to be tolerated. Eventually, we did end up kicking the person out of the party, and that was a vote by the entire party delegation. But that is a real-time example that I see time and time again in various organizations. People agree that, yes, we need to make sure that we have rules and make sure that that we call out any bad acting on any person's part. But when it comes to imposing that and actually following through with that, that's a very challenging point. And we see that in our elections. People get reelected over and over again, even though they have done horrible things. And so that is something that we have to overcome. But it comes through holding each other accountable in our communities. And so that's how we can put that into check. But how we get there again, I think that was easier in smaller communities. And when our country was smaller, it was certainly a lot easier. And we didn't even have media back then. But people knew each other. The towns were small, and people knew their neighbors. Today, there's people that have never spoken to their neighbor. And so we have to overcome those obstacles, I think, to help build back that morality into our nation.
I love this tangent because I think it really puts a face to libertarians in general, in that we definitely believe in the cultural thing, and you can't do it with a culture that hates each other, and you have to understand that we just all need to work together. But one of the things that you'll hear often is people who trade together don't fight. And to that extent, I think that the reasoning why we can do this, why we can trim down government to, in my opinion, non-existence, is that the market will drive that. And Ludwig von Mises, one of his primary things is that people act in their own self-interest to improve themselves from their point of view. Now, what happens if you go out and you do a thing that's in your self-interest? You mentioned being selfish, or greedy. Well, if you're a selfish, greedy individual and you're doing business with somebody, pretty soon they just won't do business with you. And when you're in a community where people know people and they talk to each other, pretty soon you don't have anybody to do business with. So now you got to move to a new community. Now, that's okay because we also believe in freedom of association. We believe in freedom of travel. And so that person may go find a new community and they might be greedy and selfish in that community and then have to go again. But the people who can be happy, the people who can live together and prosper and really flourish are going to be the people who are actually treating each other properly.
I think that is a great place to end, actually. Before we do, I want to make sure people know what your shirt says.
It says, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff.
I love it. Let's thank our really eloquent panelists for their time tonight.